Hi, everyone. Today's talk on sharing ideas online, remixing policy to drive meaningful action with Eric Wilson. I am Teresa Cunha. I'm the Associate Director of Democratic Governance Programs at the Ash Center. And for those that are joining our events for the first time, the Ash Center is one of 12 research think tanks affiliated with the Harvard Kennedy School. And among the many things we do, we focus on bridging academia and practice to improve our democracy. I want to start us off with some housekeeping announcements. First, I want to thank you in advance for your patience for any technical issues we may encounter today. I thought it was worth mentioning. To minimize interruptions, the audience is muted, but we encourage you to use the chat box for questions or comments. And we will dedicate time after Eric's presentation for discussion and questions. So again, just go ahead and drop those in the chat box, or we'll prompt you to raise your hand for discussion. This event is being recorded and could be found on the Ash Center website for future viewing. And today's event is part of our Technology and Democracy Fellowship Workshop Series. The fellowship is composed of mid-career practitioners who are leveraging technology to improve democratic governance. They use their affiliation with our center to incubate new ideas and explore ways to improve democracy and the ways citizens participate in it. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter today. He's our current Ash Center Tech and Democracy Fellow, Eric Wilson, who works at the intersection of politics, technology, digital organizing, online political marketing. Eric Wilson is a digital-first political strategist and most recently led Marco Rubio's digital team during the 2016 campaign for president and has worked on many other campaigns. He is the founder of LearnTestOptimize.com, a website for professionals working at the intersection of tech, marketing, and politics. Welcome, Eric, you could take it away.
Teresa, how are you? Thank you very much for having me. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. I'm sorry we couldn't be together in person. I'm going to just share my screen right now, and I'm very excited to be here with everyone. In today's politics, it's no longer enough simply to spread a message. Anyone can do that with the myriad methods of online marketing. The measure of whether an idea has currency or not is in the meaningful action that it elicits. And in this workshop, I'll highlight four broad trends that I think are shaping our politics today, both in the US and I've seen around the world. We'll learn how the policy communications are changing in response to these trends, and I'll teach you how to successfully share your ideas in the connected age. Now, I don't need to tell you that we're living through a cycle of major upheaval on a global scale. And certainly that was true even before the pandemic arrived, but it is more true now than ever. But I want to draw out four macro trends that anyone looking to shape conversation of ideas should be aware of. First, politics is being consumed as entertainment. I want to be very clear here. I'm not trying to trivialize the issues, but in terms of how it's being consumed, it's much like entertainment. So just take a look at how elite political conversation on CNN appears compared to sports channel, right? Essentially, the format is indistinguishable. We've got essentially two divisions, teams within each, and people without a team aren't paying attention. Donald Trump really tapped into this reality in 2016. He had tremendous experience as a reality TV entertainer. And the debates themselves were arguably more entertaining than the parodies of the debates. Trend number two, a community with a cause is more powerful and effective than a party with a message. New technology has certainly democratized the way we communicate with each other. And so ideas are being spread person to person. You don't need a TV station to show video. You don't need a newspaper to share written opinions, and you don't need a radio antenna for people to hear your voice. So there aren't any gatekeepers anymore, and authority doesn't really matter. For example, this is the March for Our Lives in Washington, D.C., advocating for gun control measures. significant gun control reform has been a major plank of the Democrat Party platform for 20 plus years, since the passing of the assault weapons ban in 1994. But thousands of Democrats running on gun control platforms and people like Michael Bloomberg spending billions of dollars did not make as much progress in this effort as a group of passionate young adults who had a compelling story and came together as a community on behalf of their cause. So this is for those of you who are familiar with behavioral economics or behavioral psychology. This is an example of the identifiable victim principle. We're seeing that at the local level as well. In Virginia, where I live and work, there's a group called the Liberal Women of Chesterfield County. They were a group of women who organized carpools to come to the Women's March in Washington, D.C. in 2017. And then they have stayed active. There's a group of about 3,000 volunteers, and you're seeing them very active, and they in fact for the first time ever flipped a county that had reliably voted Republican for 50 years to vote for Democrats at the statewide level. So we're seeing that trend not only at the national level but at the local level as well. Trend number 3, we live in our own individual realities. I think this goes beyond just disinformation, which is the focus of my work at the Ash Center right now. But because our media landscape has completely fractured, we're never having a shared conversation. We don't have shared trusted voices. And in some cases, we're using completely different vocabularies. I like to point to this visualization. It's a few years old now, but I still think it makes the point. This is showing the conversations happening on Twitter. Each circle represents an account. The different colors represent topics. And the bigger the circle, the more reach an account has. Well, if you isolate it to just political conversations, you see Republican conversations happening on the right in the reddish color, and liberal conversations happening on the left in the blue color. Nobody is talking with each other. And so, for some of us, this is a concern, certainly a concern, but I want to deal with like the practicalities of someone trying to share ideas. I strongly recommend that you avoid trying to convince people to your side, because you're just not going to get the traction. Your ideas aren't going to get the critical mass they need to tip over outside of a community if you're not focused on talking within your own group. Now, finally, the last trend I want to highlight, again, accelerating cycles of upheaval. Not only is it happening on a grander scale, but it's happening more quickly. To illustrate this, on the left, in 2017, Democrats came out very strong for abolishing ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency. This is after decades, going back to Bill Clinton, of Democrats really trying to stay firm on law and order and tough on crime. On the right, Donald Trump has completely upended any sort of conservative orthodoxy around things like foreign policy, trade, and economic policy. And so we're seeing those shifts and those upheavals are that would normally have taken decades are happening in the course of a few months. And that's all due to the power of technology. So now I think we need to dig into what this means for us. And obviously, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask those, and we'll save some time at the end. I'd be eager to hear your thoughts on any of those trends as well. And so what does this mean for us as people who are trying to shape the conversation of ideas and share our own thoughts and policies? Because again, all the work we do to create good ideas and good research doesn't matter if it doesn't get acted upon, doesn't get shared, doesn't get spread. The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. So I want to highlight some changes from the past to present and future. In the past, online advertising was just distribution of existing ads to online audiences. Now we have specific creative and messaging for online audience, and in the future, we're already seeing this in these sort of joke T-shirts that get circulated around Facebook. This highly personalized form of advertising. This is really where it's trending. Next, advocacy is moving away from legacy groups like the American Association for Retired People to more grassroots advocacy groups, to the pop-up movements that we're seeing, like Parkland Survivors, like the March for Our Lives group. Their power is becoming, more impactful because the tools to reach people are so widely available. That means the challenge for legacy organizations is, how do you support those movements that are aligned with you? Community, we used to have, communities pop up around a candidate. And again, still happening in a few cases like the Trump campaign, where people come to see the candidate. Now it's very important for candidates to tap into big audiences like CPAC, like the conferences that are within both ends of the political spectrum. And then the future really is these communities that exist that the politicians then tap into, right? And so it's a reversing of the relationship. The communities that can command attention and an audience will be driving the politicians and telling them what to do. Content, again, moving press releases online to content that's specifically created for the campaign and distribution, to campaigns producing their own content. This was something we saw that the Trump campaign mastered in 2016. There was even talk about, remember, a Trump TV network if he didn't win. And so we're going to see more of that going into 2020, especially with events moving fully online, being able to create your own content. Social media, we went from candidates having a presence to candidates being in charge of their own campaigns, to the very near future, we're going to have lots of Gen Z and millennials who are completely social, on all the time. And just, we're going to get a unique perspective into how things are run. And so again, find trends like that. Technology, poor use of off-the-shelf tools. Now we're really in the space of best practices and cutting edge tools. Everyone's really following the same playbook. The latest trend is ideologically native startups and technology that are helping each side achieve their goals. Tools, desktop, mobile, voice. Are you seeing a transition of how we interact with tools and how the interfaces that we use with them? In general, I think these trends follow a pattern from going closed to open, expensive to free, and broadcast to personal. I always recommend that if you see one of these trends where something's going from closed to open, expensive to free, broadcast to personal, don't swim against it, right? You're just expending more effort. So find these opportunities, go with the flow, and make your lives easier. The challenge, I just want to pause here, really give a concrete example, since I know a lot of our audience is in the academic world, and this has been a new perspective for me as I've been looking at academic literature during my time with the Ash Center. It is completely closed. You have to have a login. It is very expensive. You either have to have an affiliation with an institution, or being able to pay, sometimes hundreds of dollars for access to a single article, and largely just sort of broadcast to these communities. If you didn't know what the journal was, you wouldn't know how to find it, right? So I think that's a great example of one area where ideas shared in academia aren't as effectively spread as they could be if they adopted more personalized, for a specific audience that's outside of academics, freer and more open. So the challenge for us, obviously, is how do we communicate policy in this new online world? You know, Times Square in New York City, this is kind of a jarring image. It doesn't look like that today, but it is a bombardment of advertising. An assault on your attention. But we all have this in our pocket every single day. Um, this is what we're competing against, right? You're not competing against one political party or one idea, set of ideas or policies. You're competing against all the other things that people can do for their attention. So our greatest uh, fear should not be that people disagree with us. It's that nobody cares, right? So if nobody pays attention, uh, then your idea doesn't matter. So I love it when people argue with me and disagree with me, respectfully, hopefully, because that means that something's resonating and that they're paying attention, and an idea is worth their time, right? So if you're just tuning out from me right now, that's worse than if you disagree with me. So the solution is to create value in exchange for that time, and hopefully I'll teach some good lessons here as well. And then ask for permission. Permission-based marketing is really key. Getting people to build your assets. So again, if you're trying to share your ideas, create an email list to distribute that. One of the ideas that I like to share with everyone is something I call the content buffalo. It's a mental model that I've developed. The Native Americans of the High Plains were known for using every part of the buffalo that they possibly could. You know, the meat was used for food, hide was for clothing and shelter, bones for tools. You know, you get the idea. We have to think the same way about the content that we create. And it's at this point that the talk takes a dark turn. You know, we have to really adapt this mindset from the Native Americans of how do we harvest every bit of content we can from the work that we're producing. Everything that you create for your sharing your ideas, creating your ideas, is a content buffalo. And so it's important that you think about how do you pick that dry and never waste content. It takes a lot of repetition and variety to get an idea to sink in. Um, only when you're sick of hearing a message is your audience just now starting to pay attention. It's why I try and repeat myself a lot. Repetition is essential. That's why, songs get stuck in your head, because they get played on the radio a lot, or a TV commercial gets so tiring because it's been playing every day since the Super Bowl. But that's how it's going to get its message to stick, is that repetition. And I think a lot of people think that once they put their idea out into the world, everyone's going to know how to find it. Everyone's familiar with it, but it doesn't work. You've got to continue to push it. And we're in an age of total personalization, right? So I get to watch the shows that I want to watch, usually picked out by an algorithm. I get to read exactly the books I want to read. I get to play exactly the games I want to play. And so we're going to expect our other marketing communications to follow that same path. So, everyone consumes content differently and on their own schedule, even among your target audience. People like to consume different types of content, whether that's podcasts or videos or reading articles. So some people may be readers, others watchers. It's on you to package your content appropriately. It may feel like you're saying the same thing over and over again, but the format is really important. So how can we ensure that we maximize the value of our output and create as much content as possible? So, each recommendation from your report or your study or your white paper should be its own blog post, its own email, its own infographic, its own video, its own podcast episode. You really want to just package these ideas and repurpose it and give it more texture as much as you can. And it's important to understand that consistency really is key, because if you're trying to do more than you're capable of doing, right? If you're trying to create like a documentary, but you're not a filmmaker, you're going to have a hard time. But we can all do a quick, 30-second video direct to our camera, or it's tough to build a podcast audience. So if you're not going to be able to create the content you need, go out and find other people who have podcasts that are relevant to your issue area and ask to join them to be a guest. And then you have content that you can now share to your audiences. So consistency really is key. One trick you can do to take your content farther is to collaborate with another partner or an audience that overlaps with yours. Everyone always needs content. Telling you this as someone who writes blogs and newsletters, it's a constant grind. Try partnering with them. Not only do you get that new content, but you've enlisted a partner to help you share, right? So when you go on someone's podcast, they're going to promote it. It's a great thing to do. Now, I want to give a quick demonstration. I know we've gone through a lot, but I want to give an example of how this concept of repackaging your ideas for different online channels can be put into practice. And I'm actually going to use a paper that the Ash Center released earlier this year of one of my fellow technology and democracy fellows. So this was a report. It's about 52 pages long. It exists as a PDF on the Ash Center's website. So I want to show what are the ways that the report's authors can package their content and get their ideas to spread further, so it doesn't just remain in this report. And one of the ways they did that was by hosting an event on Capitol Hill. I think this was like one of the last in-person events I've ever been to. So I probably would have picked a more exciting one if I'd have known that, but no offense to Teresa and Zach. But they had an event. It got people to come listen, to interact with folks. So maybe if you were an auditory learner, having that experience is going to be really helpful and adds kind of value and adds more context and texture and information to the report. There were one-pagers on every table. So you not only was the report available, but there was a one-page summary. You got to hear from the report's authors. There are tons of infographics that exist in this report that can be shared on social media. I just pulled these from the charts. These are really compelling infographics that support the arguments that the paper is making. So you can see very clearly in a visual that staff levels for the key. So we're asking lawmakers to make we're asking lawmakers to make more difficult decisions with fewer resources. And so this is sort of the central theme of the paper. And having the visuals is again, as they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So again, blog post topics. I just went through the paper and looked at each section heading, and these could be their own blog posts. 500 words seems to be about the right amount. I recommend everyone should have their own blog. It's a great place to feature your work and build an audience. But if you can't do that, write a guest blog post. If the Ash Center is always looking for guest blogs. And so, I just came up with 6 ideas from the table of contents, right? So again, just take that section of the paper, summarize it down into 500 words, and now you've got a blog post that you can then go share. That blog post is going to be a lot easier to share and get attention to maybe go get on a podcast or get interviewed by a journalist than here's my 52-page report. Please download it. That sort of thing. Again, it's just sort of making the content digestible, shareable, less friction. The ideas are still there. I don't want to water that down, but the adding that texture is really critical. Op-eds, guest posts. This is a totally underutilized tool. You've got to figure out how to make this more relevant for your audience, right? So coming up with a snappy title and writing around that is really key. So, tech support. How can Congress make smarter decisions? Why Congress closed its tech help desk and now's the time to open it. Things like that are going to get noticed and get people talking are going to be really key. There was a study out recently that I know there's a debate going on in academia about, op-eds versus academic papers, and something like most academic papers are read by at most 9 people, right? So if you want your ideas to get out beyond 9 people, and you really should if they're worth pursuing, you need to put them into these popular formats and figure out how to communicate them with a wider audience. I came up with some example tweets. Again, just take a good tweet has one idea. Don't try and put everything into a tweet. You've only got 280 characters. Create, create a pithy line. Have a couple of lines of supporting, and then link to more information. So this could be a blog post. This could be your podcast. You want to sort of whet the appetite to learn more about your ideas, because promotional messages like click here to read my report aren't conveying value to people. Because again, the audience that you're trying to persuade and convince are trying to decide between reading your paper and watching Netflix. They're trying to decide between coming onto your webinar or FaceTiming their friends. So understanding these choices helps you figure out how to create content that's going to be compelling. So I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today. If you want to get in touch, you can shoot me an email, eric@ericjwilson.com. Be eager to hear your thoughts, but also hoping to have a good conversation here as well.
Oh, thank you, Eric.
Yeah, let me leave that back up. I'm sorry, in case people want to get in touch.
Great. And so if folks wanna go ahead and start either raising your hand, we're happy. This should feel a little more conversational than our usual events. I know that Eric has been a fantastic thought partner of how we should be thinking about disseminating ideas for public consumption. If I can kind of get us started. So something that stuck out to me around the politics is entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
How do we, some people may not be comfortable with their specific or issue feeling so entertainment like. What is like the right balance? I mean, we're competing with the attention of people on so many different fronts. But how does it not feel so shallow?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that the real answer lies in entertainment is in the eye of the beholder, right? So, I enjoy reading books. Some people prefer gaming, and it's all about kind of what that preference is. The real way to create something that's entertaining is to offer value, right? So if you're trying to talk to colleagues in your field, create something that they're going to find valuable, and that will be entertaining to them. So it's I think you're right that the word entertainment sort of breaks down a little, because I think there are topics that we're dealing with and talking about that are going to be very difficult to make entertaining at all. But it's that people are giving up a unit of their time, of their bandwidth, of their attention to learn about your ideas. You hopefully want to translate that into action, but you need to make it worth the trade-off. Are they going to feel better about themselves after reading your report? Are they going to be smarter after understanding your research? Or would they have, had more enjoyment out of watching an hour of Netflix, right? So that's sort of how you get in that competitive framework, because I think a lot of people underestimate and fail to grasp how, we only have 24 hours in a day, right? Just because you spend a lot of time on something doesn't guarantee that people are going to devote part of their 24 hours of their day to consuming it. So we've got to think tactically about how we make that happen.
Something that we're grappling with at the Harvard Kennedy School, a lot of students are graduating to a market that unfortunately is lacking in opportunity. But this also prevents a real opportunity for strategists like yourself who are digital first. It sounds like there's going to be an election no matter what. And that means that we're going to need
Hopefully
experts that are shored up in these types of skills. do you mind just taking a detour of this conversation and talking a
Yeah.
little bit about your professional journey and what advice you may have for people that want to do digital communications and strategy?
Yeah. So we don't know where the bottom is yet on the pandemic, but it does remind me a lot of the economy that I was coming into after graduating undergrad in 2007. Uh, we didn't know where things were. Yeah, I was doing sort of my first job out of college. I was a driver for a congressman, and I was doing some pandemic cleaning here at my house, and I came across some notes that I took one weekend when Congress was debating the TARP bill, and it was notes from a call between my boss and Secretary of the Treasury talking about how bad things were going to be, and I'm glad I saved that. But that's sort of when I came of age professionally. And it was in that context that I recognized the opportunity of social media, new media, technology, how we're going to communicate, and really got into that field. So I think my first piece of advice would be look for those opportunities. The the biggest thing that jumps out to me about the pandemic is trends that were already in place are getting accelerated, right? So food delivery, work from home, remote work, issues around equitable treatment of gig workers. Those have all come to a head because of the pandemic. So look for those places where those trends are accelerating and find opportunities. The other thing that I just recommend is, try everything, right? It's so important that I think people underestimate the value of being able to put together two different perspectives, right? So, working on the Hill and working in academia is a great way, because then you know how people consume ideas. Whereas just staying in academia or just staying on the Hill, you may not understand the methodologies of new research. So synthesizing those perspectives is really key. In terms of digital marketing specifically, the only way to learn it is to do it. And so the best way to do this, and again, I recommend that everyone develop their own audience, their own asset, your website and your email list. You need to have these, send people to them. It's a great way to practice things and see what works, see what doesn't. I have a really bad habit of just starting websites and working on projects and spending a lot of time on them, but then every now and then one will take off and you'll learn something. And um, that's sort of my biggest recommendation. I wish I had started that, long ago. I've been writing my newsletter, for example, we're coming up on our 4-year anniversary, because it's been 4 years since Marco Rubio dropped out of the presidential race. And I have, have over 2,000 subscribers to that. It's read by folks around the world, and it's just slowly but steadily, been growing. So I hope that answers a few questions. I'm happy to answer specific questions to folks if they want to shoot me an email or ask them here. But I see we've got
Great,
some
thank
folks
you
with
for that.
questions.
Grateful for that. I'm grateful for some of the things. I graduated from undergraduate during the last recession as well, and so there is the sort of panic that you have to encounter, but a lot of it is just kind of dipping your toes in a lot of fields, and you're lucky to then form a career that you're really happy with.
Right.
We had Caroline Reeves that wanted to ask a question. I'm going to
Hi,
unmute
Caroline.
you.
Hi, thanks so much for taking my question, and thanks for this really informative talk. I'm rather a dinosaur, so it's really exciting to think about, actually having people read our work, etc. But something that you said really caught my interest, which is that if somebody's arguing with you, that's a good thing. But that's something that's quite scary, honestly. You put something out there and somebody says, "Well, no, you're an idiot. That's ridiculous and that's the wrong thing." How do we take that opportunity and turn it into an opportunity rather than going, "Oh my God, this is the worst thing that happened. I should have just stuck to the 9 people who was reading my academic papers." So if you could just speak to that, how do we? You showed that map. Don't try to convince people, right? You're not going to do it, and yet when they jump on and call you, some horrible words, what do you do?
So I think the right, I like to think of this as sort of like a garden, because I like gardening, and you want to prepare your soil. So having that audience of people that is your community, those natural allies, if you just sort of throw stuff out into the ether, you're gonna get the trolls. But if you cultivate your own community of people who are really interested in your field of study or your hobbies, whatever the case may be, or your policy areas, that you're able to set some norms, right? And you're able to foster a good conversation. I just, as a practical matter, I find, uh, when someone says something negative about you and your work, it is usually a projection of something about them. It says more about them than it does about you and your ideas. I still don't. I mean, I still stew over the negative comments that people tweet me, or leave. But yeah.
Should we engage, not engage? I mean, if you just leave
Yeah.
it just like a bad egg, just rotting there and stinking everything up, or do you move us? I'm just wondering, because my field is China, and right now I have a feeling when we get into September, there's going to be a whole new world for ugly things,
Right.
and engagement with China. How shall I prepare? I mean, again,
Yeah.
ignore it. I'm happy not to engage, but is that worse?
So some guidelines here: if people are engaging with you in good faith, I always respond to them and engage with them, right? If it's just a troll saying, China lied, communists are bad, like that is not someone who's trying to have a good faith argument, and other people are going to recognize that, hopefully, and chances are that person is a bot. And then there's the other factor of, haters are motivators, right? They help you sharpen your arguments. You anticipate responses and things like that. So I actually find that really valuable kind of feedback and user testing, for thoughts. Again, I hate it when people don't respond, and I love a good argument. That's just me. But it has to be done in good faith. They want to improve the conversation. They want to advance it. Leaving it, especially if it's a good faith argument and they've made a good point, don't just leave it, because there's this principle, in any social network, about 1% of the network creates 90% of the content, and then there's 9% that sort of casually interact. Those are your commenters, the people who are sort of chirping at you, and then 90% are lurkers. And so the lurkers are still seeing these comments, and if they're making good points and you're not responding to them, they think that they might be right and you don't have an answer to it. Good luck with everything. It's very important work right now.
Thank you. Super helpful. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you for that question. I want to remind our viewers that are on YouTube that you can drop your question in the question box on YouTube, and we'll read them on this Zoom channel. But I'm going to call on Anastasia. Hi, welcome. I'm going to unmute you.
Hi. Hi, Theresa. Hi, Eric. Thank you for this wonderful discussion. I'm an educational content creator on YouTube, and I just appreciate so much the things that we're talking about here. I wanted to ask you about content. You made the point that we should not be feeling awkward repeating stuff, which really speaks to me, because very often I feel like, oh, I already said this.
Right.
Is it appropriate to be saying it again? So thank you so much. That was so important to hear. But I wonder, how can I cater with my content to viewers who are being exposed to these ideas for the first time, and they need this level, and to those who have been with me or have been following this topic for years and they're at this level? And I mean, how do I meet both with one single piece of content? How do you approach that? Yeah,
so that's a real challenge, and there are a couple of strategies that I found to deal with this. So, and by the way, I just love it when I make the same points over and over again, and after I've said the same thing the fifth time to the same person, they're like, "Oh yeah, that's really smart." Like, well, where were you when were you not paying attention? So don't underestimate the fact that things that are that even if you've had people who've been subscribed to your channel for 2 years, may have heard it 4 different times. It may not be till that 5th, 6th, or 7th time that you mention it, that it sinks in, or that you hit the right explanation or the right example for them. I think it's there's a lot of underappreciated value in articulating something for folks. So there's huge benefit in saying something the right way that people already know to be true. It could be totally obvious to everyone in your field or your audience, but because you articulated it, it's created value for them. And they say, okay, now I know how to talk about this. On a practical level, I recommend having some sort of start here page, orientation, have, again, as content creators, we're thinking about this in a linear, right? I wrote my 4 blog posts this month. This blog post was first, but that's not how people are consuming, especially on YouTube. I regularly am watching videos from 5 years ago. And so being able to have that synthesis of everything you need to know about this topic, or here's my playlist on something or other, basically, again, going back to this metaphor of cultivating your garden, cultivating your audience, how do you give them the fertilizer, that presumed knowledge that you hope that they have? So I think it's tremendously helpful, if you have a blog post that says, are you new? Start here, watch my most popular video, things like that, and really give people a map for your content. And that's a good problem to have because you've been creating lots of content.
Thank you for that question, Anastasia. I'm going to read a question from one of our viewers on YouTube. Arnold writes, it seems like we are moving into an age of marketing. Do you conduct market research of sorts for your customers in your own work, or a more shotgun approach? For example, the more you put out, the more likely you are to hit something. What's your approach?
Yeah, so I take the approach, and I think this is, again, my expertise is in politics, and I think this is the most effective. You got to say what you believe and create the content, follow the ideas that you know to be true, or and find the evidence to support that. Marketing, market research and market testing, focus grouping, doing polls, that's a shortcut, and it works sometimes, but it's not sustainable, right? So the best way to do this is to put things out into the world. So put your ideas out there, before you spend 2 years of your life doing a research study, write a blog post, get some feedback from your colleagues in the industry or the field of study. The way I frequently do this, I'll put a tweet out about an idea. If it doesn't get any interaction, I'm not going to write that blog post. But if it does and people pick up, I'm just like, okay, I'm going to do a blog post on it. And then if people really speak to that, I'm like, okay, I'm going to put together a talk or a video. And so that's the kind of market research that you should be doing, because the greatest asset that we have is unsolicited advice right now. And so being able to siphon that into, creative output, because what you don't want to have happen is, and I see this all the time on campaigns, they'll spend $10,000 to create a web video, and they put it up and no one likes it. That was $10,000 wasted. They could have done a 30-second version of the video where they're just sharing the same ideas for no money, and it would get 10 times as much reach. Or you put out a bunch of videos. So it's really just, finding the audience, what do they value, and creating content that they value, and that gets it helps you achieve your goals.
Great. I'm gonna move on to the next question.
That was a good question. Thanks.
Hangi from YouTube asks, the internet made it easy to speak to 1,000 people, but hard to listen to 1,000 people. Do you have a suggestion on how to efficiently synthesize responses from a large audience online?
I do. And so this is gets a little bit, as Teresa knows, into my work with my project for the fellowship right now, which is sort of how do we protect ourselves from disinformation? And one of the things that I have found that seems to be very effective is curating your own experience. I think a lot of people just sort of yield this to the algorithms of the social media platforms, where you follow the people that they tell you to follow, you follow the most popular accounts. And that's the kind of thing that makes social media a miserable experience for a lot of people. What I have found, and what I try and encourage people to do is find those people whose ideas you resonate with and follow them. Figure out whose email lists they're reading, whose blogs they're following, who they're following on Twitter. So it is not easy to do, because keep in mind that the whole the goal of social media platforms is to get you to spend more time on the platform rather than to be more informed and to get a balanced opinion. So you've got to really go out of your way to do that. So and again, that goes back to the point we were just making about you've got to be able to synthesize other perspectives from other people. And so you really have to try and go out and find people who have perspectives outside of your own filter bubble, right? So I don't have a great answer on that, but it does require a little bit more work. You can't just be a net letting everything come to you. You've got to sort of be a lure trying to go out and find people.
Thank you for that. I want to just remind everyone, we have a few more minutes together. There's any questions? Let's see. There will be a recording. Yes, there'll be a recording, and it'll be on our website. So you are free to share that with your student org. I want to talk a little bit more about this moment right now, Eric. You shared before we started with the live version of this, of the contingency plans that campaigns, causes should be doing at this moment, whether we might be social distancing in November, maybe we're not, maybe it's a hybrid. Can you expand a little bit about what we should be preparing for?
Yeah, so I think we just talked about this idea of trends are accelerating, right? So as we both know, being in the campaign field, we have been moving to more virtual campaigns, remote work campaigns, tech-enabled campaigns. And so the campaigns that are succeeding right now and are going to be able to survive the pandemic and social distancing are the ones that were doing the stuff that they already should have been doing. So there are a lot of campaigns who kind of got caught flat-footed and are trying to catch up right now. So the idea here is focus on those, create your contingency plans, assume we won't be able to do canvassing, right? Which is crazy, because that's our most effective way to drive turnout, increase support. What are you going to do if you don't have canvassing? And hopefully we're back into a situation where it's safe to do that and people feel comfortable responding to canvassers, but we may not be, in which case you've got a plan ready. And if we do get back to normal, or whatever that looks like, you'll be glad that you had that extra capacity. Being able to email and contact your supporters. I mean, just crazy how many organizations don't have that basic functionality built in. They instead rely on people showing up at an event every month. So there are those sorts of things that you should have had already in place. I've been trying to, this is an idea that I'm still working through, but I think that there are two phases of digital transformation, especially in politics. So the first is taking the analog and putting it online, right? So can't have a town hall, we're going to do a Zoom. Can't do my fundraiser, so we're going to have a Zoom cocktail hour. The next phase, and where I'm really most excited about and looking for innovators, is what is that transformation, right? So like with Zoom, being able to interact with people, take polls, get comments, bring other people in, like adding those extra features that technology unlocks, I think is, again, going back to the career question of someone's going to, have a good career for themselves if they figure out a way to do good virtual fundraisers, right? And I'd love to talk to you if you've got that idea and want to help Republicans. But I think, I just think there's a real opportunity in figuring out what's that second phase of transformation.
Yeah, and I've been thinking a lot about that as well, because we know that technology only reaches so many people. I mean, there's still a digital divide. There's a digitally kind of native people, maybe of like the younger, on the younger spectrum. How are we reaching communities that are not online? How do we reach older people who get our message to? So I think that there'll be some creative moments that we're going to find ourselves in of how to reach these people.
Yeah.
I want to move to a question that we have on YouTube from Philip. Philip worked in Senator Rubio's office as an intern in the Miami office, so we have an alum on our hands. He asks, what's the best way to get voters excited about local races using digital media? For example, city council, state assembly, etc.
Yeah. So with local races, you don't have the advantage of lots of attention on it, although we all know that those are some of the most impactful races in our daily lives. The challenge that I see a lot with candidates at that level is that they know that they need to have a presence online, but they don't know why, right? So I always like to, when people are using social media and setting it up, I think everything you post has to be around this idea of why should someone follow you? And simply because you're running for office is not a good enough reason, right? So I'm passionate about opening more dog parks, dealing with traffic, whatever those things are that are in your local community. I think that needs to come through on social media. The other challenge at that local level, and I know this is the case in South Florida, is local media has just been gutted, right? So the reporters that would show up and make sure that voters are informed about the campaign and the issues aren't there. That's an area for campaigns to offer value. Again, going back to this idea of value and entertainment, letting people know what the issues are, what's at stake, being honest about, the different arguments, I think is tremendously valuable. You've got to go out and build the audience, because there are people who are passionate about local issues. You've just got to find them. The more you talk about them, the more you create content around that, the more they're going to identify themselves to you. So that really goes to the core of permission-based marketing. But again, I think what I want to encourage people like Philip and the candidates that they work with to avoid is say, okay, well, I know only 10,000 people are going to decide this election. I'm going to get Facebook ads, and we're going to micro target those 10,000 people. We're going to tell them exactly what they want to hear, and we're not going to talk to anyone else. That's fine tactically, but it's not a sustainable strategy. You haven't gotten people opted into your agenda. You don't have an asset that you can go back to over and over to, produce change. And so again, we got that first step of digital transformation. Let's find the second step.
You bring up a really good point around kind of the relational part of this organizing work. People who are really steeped in kind of the study of organizations, organizing, is very critical of kind of this marketing feel that digital organizing specifically could look like. But I think we're talking about something a little deeper and something different. And I think that you just made that distinction very clear. So we have just a few more minutes together. If anyone, this is a last call for questions. And if I don't see any in the next couple of seconds, I'm gonna ask my last question. And so I think I'm gonna go ahead and dive into that. Eric, if people, a lot of them are running their own campaigns and causes at home, what are some resources?
Sorry, Teresa, I couldn't hear you, but it sounds like you were asking about resources for how to put some of this in place. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
So sorry, my microphone didn't pick it up. So yes, what are some resources that you think that everyone should have in their toolbox as they do the work?
Yeah. So think about your work in terms of owned audiences, your email list and your website. These need to be your home bases. Don't rely just on Facebook. Don't rely on Twitter. Daniel Marks, one of our fellows right now, has done some great work at how Facebook has made his job organizing in the African American community more difficult. Right. So if you own your audience, you own your people own people's attention on email, on text message, on website, on an app, whatever the case may be, that's really valuable. So figure out how to do that. In terms of practical tips, I can't really speak much to the left, but I know there are great groups like Netroots and gosh, my favorite one, the Wellstone Institute and New Organizing Institute, are no more, but some of their content still lives on. Organizing for Action, the Obama C4 open sourced all of their training materials. I found that to be incredibly valuable. I send out a weekly newsletter at bestpracticedigital.com that has some tips. It's more tactical focused. But again, I would recommend folks read about marketing, specifically around email marketing and blogging and content marketing, to get some of these ideas and learn these tactics. But the best way to do it is to test it out yourself. Again, if I were a student, I would be, figuring out how do I start an email list? What's the stuff that people in my network are interested in? What can I write to establish myself as a credible person? I think a lot of students, particularly folks who are getting ready to look at jobs, are scared away from using social media because they're sort of taught, unfortunately, that it can only cause problems for you. But if you use it properly and have a clear goal in mind, I think it can be a tremendous asset.
That's a great message to leave things on, and we're right on time. So yay for us. So do you mind just repeating your website one more time?
Yeah, so most people would probably enjoy learntestoptimize.com, which is my weekly newsletter. I just curate reads about technology and politics, has a lot of these articles about tactics in there. I have another website, bestpracticedigital.com, which focuses on, how do you get your emails delivered? What's the best way to write a blog post, social media tactics. So that's more of the nuts and bolts. So a couple of different audience or things for folks to check out if they're looking for resources. And I will say I try and be pretty nonpartisan on all of those. I think I actually have more Democrats signed up for my email list than I do Republicans.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much, Eric. We'll make sure to put the website links on the event description where the video will live. I want to thank you again for joining us. This talk will be posted on the website, and this conversation wraps up our Tech and Democracy series for the semester. And if you like what you learned today, I encourage you to watch the early recordings from our other events. And you can visit the Ash Center website under the events section. And if you want to follow the Ash Center and the work that we do, find us on Twitter at Harvard Ash. And lastly, I want to thank the audience for joining us and for the great questions and discussion that we had. Take care, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks, Teresa.
Thank you. Bye.